I have been kind of following the trial of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, as you may be doing. I would say that I'm following out of respect for the victims who have been able to testify because of new victims' rights laws. And there's an important witness that they're giving, and I want to hear and receive that witness. We're heading toward the anniversary of the marathon bombing again, and our extended community of the Boston area has particularly strong ties now because of that terrible trauma. Boston strong. The fanatical commitment of the Tsarnaev brothers was truly disturbing. The living son, the one who's on trial, is still in the grips of a horrible, insane religious ideology that equates killing with righteousness. This is the stuff that all of the people who totally reject religion point to when they talk about all the harm that religion does in the world. Well, you know what? We are religious. You know, even though you might call yourself spiritual but not religious because you might want to distance yourself from that, but we are religious. And we have to engage with that criticism. It's a grievous shame. That's not even a strong enough word. It's a grievous disgrace against humanity and any civilized notion of ethics, and to the God of our understanding to use ancient scriptures written in savagely tribal times to justify continued destruction and acts of terror, particularly those against the vulnerable human body. All of this hurts so much because we realize that for some people, we still live in a savagely tribal world. In the case of the Tsarnaev brothers, I think we feel an extra level of betrayal because the Commonwealth of Massachusetts offered them support and hospitality in the form of financial help and subsidies. But there you have medieval notions of bloodlust crashing against more modern notions of progress and the social contract. Of course, it's tempting to regard the rising forces of fanaticism as a political problem for which we need a political solution, and we do. And you know, that bloodlusty part that lives in me, and it lives in all of us, if it doesn't live in you, please tell me because I want to hang out with you more. I say, go to war, get them. You know, wipe them out. Wipe out their hiding places, their training grounds, their recruitment websites. Bomb them to kingdom come. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on what kind of day you're having, we recall that we are obligated by virtue of our own religious commitments and values to consider the shared humanity we have, even with people lost to the teachings of false prophets and enthralled to terrible gods. Why do we bother? Why do we keep at this human connectedness? Because we occupy the same planet, for one thing. We share one world. We love our children equally and want them to have a future. And we have been given this time together. Because on a purely strategic level, also, history teaches us that the mass murder or extermination of any people is a tragedy that resonates for centuries with horrible consequences for the victims and the victors alike. We call that moral injury. It is worth trying to understand fanaticism because it's a rising force on the global scene, and it is too easy to dismiss as some kind of contagious madness. We're at fault. We are at fault when we think that that form of religion has no relation whatsoever to our more enlightened form of religion. Like, no, completely on completely different planets. But that's not true. Religion is a human instinct that arises from being alive and being conscious of that fact and of the fact of mortality. The urge to want to distance ourselves from religious fundamentalism and extremism and say, that is not in any way related to my spiritual experience, is a mistake. Because I'll tell you something, what we share ultimately with those people is this concern, which is What should I be willing to live for and die for? Within that concern falls the ethical question, what does it mean to worship rightfully? It's important to understand that all things that draw us, that pull us for good and worthy reasons, have the potential to become obsessions. You know, I look at our community and I know that as I'm speaking here to you, some of us are in obsessions, involved in obsessive, sort of fanatical feelings that no one else knows about. Maybe it's a celebrity crush, or an addiction to pornography, a love affair with drink, a senseless urge to ruin a strong marriage we know would be disastrous, but just feel we have to pursue. Our souls are drawn like moths to the flame of passion. And what the soul ultimately longs for, I think, is intimacy with God, with the ground of being, with life itself. Even if we think that's a sexual or emotional obsession, it's ultimately, I think, spiritual. It's a spiritual instinct. So there may be something to hope for in understanding that even the most virulent fanatic alive is actually operating out of an essentially spiritual place, an instinct that's gone terribly awry. But that instinct, that desire, really is total immersion of the self in the greatness of God. And that's something that the mystical tradition is all about. So I want to share with you a couple of little phrases by the great Muslim Persian mystic Rumi, who is dearly beloved by many Unitarian Universalists. But we don't think about Rumi as being fanatical because he didn't do anything violent with his passions. He was just a teacher. But here's Rumi. Listen to this, looking for traces of sort of that edge of fanaticism. Intimacy and longing for intimacy, and he's always talking about God here. Intimacy and longing for intimacy, one song. A disastrous surrender and a fine love together. Here's another one. Gamble everything for love. If you're a true human being, if not, leave this gathering. Half-heartedness doesn't reach into majesty. You set out to find God, but then you keep stopping for long periods at mean-spirited roadhouses. Rumi always talks about being consumed in the flame and ripping the fabric away, violent images for being consumed in God's fire, that passion. So you can see, if you have a skewed sense of what love means, that this kind of passion can tip right into obsession. Right? You hear that phrase, gamble everything for love, takes on a whole new meaning when you think of women with explosives strapped to their chest. One of the hallmarks of youth is that idealism that draws a young man or woman into a terrorist group like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Eboo Patel is an American Muslim advocate for interfaith cooperation, and he once said something like, listen, Al-Qaeda is the most successful youth group that any religious organization ever had. I have to find that exact quote. Some of you might have been aware that Saturday Night Live a couple of weeks ago did a satirical piece about ISIS. What they did is they made they made a version of that really warm and loving Toyota commercial where the dad drops his daughter off at college and, take care of her and warm affection. Well, in this version, starring Dakota Johnson, the father drops his daughter off at the airport as she sets off to, in the actual commercial, she sets off to join the army, but in this commercial, she's joining ISIS. And these guys drive up in a tank, and they've got, the guns and strapped with ammo. And she gets out, of the car, and it's like, Dad, I'll be okay. It's just ISIS, she says. And the father It's like, well, take care, and he says to the guys in the truck, take good care of her. And the man responds, death to America. And they got a lot of flack for this, as you can imagine. But it speaks to that youthful idealism and passion that can be exploited by these extremist groups. We need criminal courts and diplomacy and homeland security and military action, yes, to draw a circle around the fanatics of the world. They should not be allowed to act out their deranged version of divine justice and intimacy on others. Infidels, that's every other is an infidel. But it does help, I hope, to understand the spiritual root of the problem. Because frankly, the socioeconomic and political explanation that this is all about poverty and lack of opportunity doesn't suffice. I don't buy it, you might, but there are many oppressed populations of young people who do become nihilistic, but they don't end up cutting off people's heads. I think I just saw an amen nod, As we do when we examine human nature and its health or dis-ease, we ask ourselves where we engage in smaller fanaticisms. Our ministry theme this month is commitment, and so I come at this from the perspective of where are we dangerously overcommitted and to what? Even we who are humanistic and apparently eminently reasonable in our religious expressions are prone to everyday fanaticisms. Where are our own commitments prone to tip from commitment to obsession? How do we hold ourselves and each other accountable for minding when they stop being life-giving and become tyrannies of mind and spirit that harm us, our families, and our communities? It's part of the work we do as a church community, and it's hard. I think a lot about a very dear friend of mine who worked as a nanny for a long time to a family with 5 children, a wonderful family. But the 3 boys, there were 4 boys and 1 girl, were expected to go to hockey practice every day for like 3 hours. And I mean every day, and I mean in the summer. And they spent an hour in the car in traffic each way, at least an hour. And the daughter would always ride along because her interests and needs were secondary, quite frankly, to the family's rabid insistence on raising hockey boys. I think about comparisons here to stage mothers and these reality shows, about these obsessive fame monger types, dance moms or whatever. The passion for sports and for excellence is wonderful, it's fine, it's life-giving, but then where does it tip into imprisonment? My friend quit that job. She loved that family, but she quit the job because she was so disturbed by the cheerful insistence of the parents that this was great for the kids and they loved it and it's good for them. She was the one, though, dragging them out of bed in the morning. She was the one driving them and sitting in traffic on a gorgeous summer day, day after day after day, while they breathed fumes from trucks on Route 95, and who knew that they felt imprisoned by this expectation. Do those children love hockey that much, or like the young Muslim fanatic who longs to be found worthy by a savage and inaccessible God, do these little boys equally long for approval from their parents, the gods of their young lives? So some of the things we look for when we are assessing whether our commitments are becoming fanatical. We say, is this about status? If it is, gotta look at that. Is this about an ego need that I have to get met? And I can't let go? Is this commitment about projection? which is something we do tend to do to our parents, our children rather. Oops, Freudian slip. My kid wants to be a prima ballerina. She loves this. Well, that child worships you, right? Maybe that child wants to be subsumed in your love the way the fanatic wants to be subsumed in the love of God and will ruin themselves to get that love. Is this commitment rather grounded in competitiveness? Gotta win. Some of our sports, obsessions are like that, right? I mean, it's almost baseball season. I get it. And also certainty. Certainty is always a hallmark of a watch it, because the minute we say, this is the way it has to be, I know it for a fact. This is the natural order of things. I'm certain of that. We may be getting fanatical. Even in the face of clear evidence to the contrary, the fanatic insists that such things are true. And here's one. Marriage is between a man and a woman. Well, obviously it's not. Plain and simple. You need to go to my alma mater and be a top athlete. Well, obviously, maybe the kid doesn't. They seem to just be doing their own thing. So that isn't a fact, it's a projection. This is the way we've always done things. Fanatical thinking leaves no room for error. That's really where it's particularly dangerous in institutions, because you have no room there with that certainty. You have no room for creative interpretation. And again, no room for the kind of growth that chaos and failure can bring. And I'm looking at Larry Pierce, who is one of the best church consultants that I have ever known, and worked for a long time for the Alban Institute and now is an independent consultant. And he sees, as churches fall apart, I'm sure, that kind of small-time fanaticism that says we can't change that. That's what a church is and does, and it can't, we can't, that's the way we've always done it. That choking feeling. Liberal religious people of interpreting spirit, curious and open people, it always behooves us to remember our own prophet Ralph Waldo Emerson's admonition that what we are worshiping, we are becoming. In days and weeks to come, and in the service of our individual, family, congregational, and community health, may God grant us the courage to unflinchingly examine our secretly intractable beliefs, hold them to the light of day, and test them for righteousness, for goodness. This is the only way to guard against excessive commitment to the wrong things, that we be willing to hear and consider objections to our commitments, that we consider the perspective of those vulnerable people and living beings whose existence is affected in some way by our passions, and that we continue to join in covenanted community to find that beautiful sweet spot between passion and responsibility to the greater good. So may it be.